we are all set for our first panel. It's a great honor to see so many friends, so many colleagues, including now National Assembly member Wee Sung-lak, who I was a junior staffer on Capitol Hill, all of 23 years old, when he identified me as someone who might be interested in going to Korea on a congressional staff del, and as 20 years later, I ended up being ambassador. So I'm hoping he's also picking stocks later on today, so we appreciate that. But in a deadly serious topic here for us, what is, as the keynote speeches have outlined, we have a return of Donald J. Trump as President of the United States, and a new feature, in addition to several other, I would also argue, interesting new features of the bilateral relationship, is what some experts, including a prominent one here to my right, have cited as the emergence of the axis of upheaval, right, and the strengthening of other sub-regional groupings, especially Iran, North Korea, China, Russia, right? And this is a grouping that many experts feel does not support and actively works against a U.S.-based alliance system that works to obviously uphold the rules-based international order. So most probably salient for this group is Russia DPRK cooperation, which has already been mentioned in the keynote, right? We've seen munitions, tech transfer, deployment of troops, mutual defense pact, quite significant. As I alluded to just a few moments ago, the U.S. ROK alliance has also undergone significant changes over the last 4 years, right? Gone, or at least mitigated, are disputes over burden sharing. There's less emphasis on inter-Korean relations and symmetry, and we have moved, I would say, back towards a trajectory that we have seen under Bush II and Obama. So in light of these shifts and the uncertainty that surrounds both the U.S. election and the geopolitical environment, this panel is charged with seeking to look at the core work of the alliance on the Korean Peninsula, efforts across the Indo-Pacific, its work together in multilateral institutions, again, in an environment that is colored by change here in Washington and by the increasing efforts of an axis of upheaval, or whatever term you would like to use, working against many of the interests of this alliance in the international arena. So with that said, with that opening, let's go to quickly introduce our panelists. I'm going to be very brief, but look up their bios. It's very impressive. To my immediate right is Dr. Andrea Kendall-Taylor. Sorry, I got off a flight today, but Senior Fellow and Director of Transatlantic Security at CNAS, 8 years as a Senior Intelligence Officer, including Deputy National Intelligence Officer at the NIC for Russia and Eurasia, Distinguished Practitioner in Grand Strategy at Yale, and BA from Princeton, PhD from UCLA. I'll go to Dr. Soohoon, Fellow at KIDA, I'm sorry, KIDA. I never do that right. I've been doing this for 20 years. Also, was a research professor at the Global Korean Studies program. He has written extensively on the Indo-Pacific and security policy as a BA from Lehigh University, Go Mountain Hawks, an MBA, and a PhD from Korea University. I'm going to go to Lieutenant General Willard Burleson, Bill, as he likes to be called, but Lieutenant General, as Lieutenant General, he has a storied career in the U.S. Army, including Commanding General of the 8th Army, Chief of Staff at CFC, global service around the world, including deployments to the Balkans, Iraq, Afghanistan, time in Egypt. He has a BS from West Point and an MA from the Army War College in Strategic Studies. And last but not least, everybody knows the ubiquitous, well-traveled and insightful Pak Jin, former foreign minister, former 4-term member of the National Assembly, including chair of the Foreign Affairs, Trade, and National Unification Committee, where he passed Chorus FTA, presidential press and political affairs secretary in different iterations. Those are 2 different positions.
You don't have to read all those.
Okay, the final point is, I'll just skip then and just say, BA at Seoul National, MPA at Harvard, where he actually gave me an honorary degree from Harvard, and a PhD from Oxford. And I'll just say this, that then Prime Minister John Major, I think, called him the best English-speaking Korean he'd ever met. So I skip all of that. So let's get into it, as they say. And usually I'd go to the foreign minister first, but we're going to talk with Dr. Kendall-Taylor, because she wrote a seminal article in Foreign Affairs and has been featured in a number of different forums talking about this issue. So to allow us to set the scene, we're going to turn to Dr. Kendall-Taylor, but let's get into this. You've outlined cogently, and I would argue in compelling terms, how 4 important countries, North Korea, Iran, Russia, China, are, as I mentioned in the outset, working against U.S. interests around the world. Could you start the panel off by describing how you see the situation, the trend lines, and the road ahead?
Yeah, well, it's wonderful to join such a distinguished panel, and thanks everyone for joining us. As you said, and when I say we, I am talking about my co-author, Richard Fontaine, who's the president of CNAS. In this article, we've tried to encapsulate what we mean by the growing cooperation between Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea by terming it the axis of upheaval. Because we believe that these 4 countries working together are working very hard to overturn the global rules and norms that underpin the current international system. The cooperation between these 4 countries was already present before Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and that's particularly true of the Russia-China relationship that had already been deepening significantly, really in the aftermath of Russia's first invasion of Ukraine in 2014. So the seeds of this relationship were already present. These 4 countries bring to the table their shared intent to undermine U.S. power and influence, to undermine the U.S. system of alliances, and to really change the global order that they believe disadvantages each of them. So they have a very powerful glue, a strong motivation for their cooperation, and the seeds of this were already present. And then comes February 2022 with Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And I really see that as the critical catalyst that it greatly accelerated the cooperation between these countries. The Kremlin really has been the critical catalyst that has put the winds in the sails of this cooperation and really has been the engine. And what I think we're seeing is that this cooperation does a couple of critical things. Number one, it's increasing the military capabilities of the United States and its allies' adversaries, while at the same time it's diluting the foreign policy tools that we collectively use to confront them. So it's weakening, diluting sanctions, export controls. It's also weakening our presence in information environments and making it far more difficult to rally coalitions of countries to push back. And we can talk through each of those different pieces of it. But the military piece, I think, has really been the most important and consequential, and we can see the outcome of that on the battlefield in Ukraine. The North Korea piece has been really remarkable to watch, and obviously early on, the North Koreans were sending large amounts of ammunition, missiles, and now have sent at least 10,000 fighters to the Kursk region of Russia. China has been buying up large amounts of oil and gas that send the revenues back into the bank accounts that fuels the war, and really critically the component pieces, the technology that allows Russia to circumvent the export controls and continue the war machine, and the Iranian drones and other support. We see the consequences every day on the battlefield in Ukraine, but just as important is what Russia is giving away in return to each of these countries, and we can get into that on the North Korea question, but I always like to highlight the recent U.S. revelation that Russia has given away submarine technology to China. And we had done a report on Russia-China years ago in 2021 timeframe. And when we tried to imagine at that point how far Russia would be willing to go in support of China and its partners, that technology was so sensitive that we thought it was at the very outer bounds of what the Kremlin would be willing to do. And now, just 3 short years later, here we are. So it just underscores the very rapid acceleration. The final point I want to make is one about where this is likely to go. And I would say that the entrance of North Korean fighters on the battlefield in Ukraine is a very worrisome reminder that with highly personalized authoritarian leaders, and that's the case in Russia, North Korea, increasingly in China, to a slightly lesser extent North Korea, but still that dynamic is there. Where you have these highly personalized authoritarian leaders, cooperation can evolve rapidly and in very unpredictable ways. And that is something we have to recognize. And what we know from political science literature is also that these highly personalized leaders are already the most prone to pursue the most risky and aggressive foreign policy. There's good research that shows they're the most likely to initiate wars. They're the most likely to fight wars with democracies, and they're the most likely to invest in nuclear weapons. And I would argue that now Russia, as it is increasingly dependent on some of these countries, is going to do things that will fuel these already existing tendencies in each of these countries that will produce very dramatic implications in each of the regions. And so I'll leave it there because I think we'll pick that apart, but hopefully that helps set the stage.
No, outstanding. Dr. Kendall-Taylor, thanks for the great laydown. This feels like a U.S. NSC meeting where we let the intelligence community go first. Now we go to the Secretary of State over here. Let me come to the Foreign Minister. You heard this really, I would say, cogent and concise, insightful laydown of alarming global trends that are very different from when President Trump was first in office, from 2016 to 2020. You are a principal architect of the Yoon Suk-yeol GPS. How do you see this situation evolving, both in terms of Korea and its relations around the world, but also the U.S. ROK alliance?
Yeah, thank you. I'm Park Jin, former Foreign Minister of the Republic of Korea, and thank you for inviting me to this wonderful panel. I enjoyed your presentation, very succinct and very to the point. The GPS initiative that you mentioned, Mark, is an idea that Korea aims to promote its global roles and responsibility in order to contribute to freedom, peace, and prosperity of the world, based on Korea's enhanced power and influence, and our commitment to democracy, and also Korea's technological competitiveness and cultural attraction. So we want to contribute to the world peace and prosperity in a very active way. However, this authoritarian convergence, which is the name of this panel, including countries like North Korea, Russia, China, and Iran, certainly pose challenges to the Korea's efforts to materialize this GPS vision. I know that all these 4 countries have their own national interests and their own policy priorities, so they don't move in one way. But somehow the contest between democracy and authoritarian regime, I think, is a reality. And in that sense, Korea, as a country that is a leading democracy in Asia, would like to make sure that our rules-based international order can be maintained in Indo-Pacific and in Europe and other regions in the world. Korea is not a member of NATO, but our President Yoon Suk-yeol has been consecutively attended the NATO conference as a global partner, together with countries like Japan, Australia, and New Zealand. So we made this IP4 group, Indo-Pacific 4 group, where we discuss Asian security as well as the European security. Now, North Korea's dispatch of its combat troops to Russia to fight a war in Ukraine, I think it's a dangerous strategic gamble by Kim Jong-un to receive the advanced military technology from Russia. Dr. Kendall-Taylor mentioned the sensitive nuclear submarine technology which Russia has given to China. I didn't know that. Obviously, North Korea wants to do the same. They want to have a nuclear-powered submarine technology, military satellite, and the ICBM re-entry technology, maybe plus advanced Russian air fighters like Sukhoi 35. So we have to be very watchful and should make efforts to stop these dangerous actions by North Korea, together with our ally, United States, and also our close neighbor, Japan. So this authoritarian convergence actually creates an opportunity for Korea to strengthen our partnership with the United States and Japan. And I'm sure that under the second Trump administration, this Korea-U.S. Japan trilateral partnership and collaboration will certainly continue, because I remember it was President Trump's administration which began to talk about Korea, U.S., Japan trilateral cooperation, which has been consistently developed during the last 4 years. So that's a challenging and opportunity at the same time. And also we should make efforts to work with our friends in the United Nations, G20 and APEC, and other countries to put pressure on Russia and North Korea to stop these dangerous, illicit military ties and to stop threatening other countries. In that sense, it creates an opportunity for Korea-China strategic dialogue. In Lima, Peru, several days ago, our President Yoon Suk-yeol had a chance to meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping. And I think they discussed many issues of mutual concern. And obviously, because China is feeling uncomfortable, and it's a problem for China, because China thinks that they are the supporters, they are backing up North Korea, but now North Korea is moving towards Russia. So they are playing Russia off against China, which is not new, but at this time it's very conspicuous. So we hope that all these developments can somehow be aptly dealt with based on Korea-U.S. alliance under the second Trump administration.
All right, outstanding Foreign Minister, really insightful intervention. Let me come back to you with one follow-up that draws on both your some of your comments, your long history as a practitioner and professor of in foreign policy international relations, and as a key architect of GPS, which is a very forward-looking document. The durability of these relations among these four countries. You know, you have touched on it a little bit in your intervention, in that you've now seen new relationships. You think back 10 years ago, North Korea and Russia didn't have much of a relationship. The relationship between North Korea and China was extremely cold. Iran kind of doing it's off on its own in negotiations with the Obama administration. When you have to look out, drawing on your past experience, do you see this grouping as durable? And if so, how do you work to align Korean strategic interests around this grouping?
Well, I can say maybe three things. One is that it depends on how the war in Ukraine is going to be have an end game. What kind of final result would come out of the Ukraine conflict may influence the relationship between Russia and North Korea and Korea and the United States. I hope for a end of the war in Ukraine and the restoration of peace and democracy in that country. And that's the reason why Korea has been coherently supporting the people of Ukraine through humanitarian assistance. And two, I think that North Korea's action and decision to send the military combat ground troops to Ukraine, I think is the biggest mistake. By doing so, they are isolating much more than before themselves under stronger international sanctions. And I think the North Korean economy might have to suffer because they are going in the wrong direction. So I hope that North Korea can come back to the right course of action, which is to denuclearize its nuclear arsenal and to stop missile provocations and to sit down for peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. President Yoon has proposed in his audacious initiative speech 2 years ago and also in the National Liberation Day speech this year that if North Korea decides to move towards substantive denuclearization, we'll be happy, we'll be ready to provide assistance, economic, diplomatic, and corresponding measures to help North Korea make a different future. Unfortunately, we haven't heard any positive response from North Korea. Instead, they are sending us trash balloons and then say that we are a kind of two hostile states on the Korean Peninsula. This is exactly the wrong way for North Korea to go. So I think we should send a very strong message together between Korea, U.S., and Japan and other countries to make sure that North Korea can come back to the right position. If not, then we will strengthen our pressure and sanctions on North Korea.
All right, outstanding. Thanks, Foreign Minister. Let me turn to the Lieutenant General here. General Burleson, let's talk about the military piece of this. You heard Dr. Kendall-Taylor and her lay down, talk about the importance of the military elements. We've gotten excellent intervention here from the Foreign Minister on the political, diplomatic, policy machinations. I want to bring in the military piece here. And you've got global experience that I think will help inform this conversation that is both rooted in the peninsula and has implications around the world for self-evident reasons. Let's talk about, we've got different missions that the U.S. ROK military piece is now undertaking. You've got core deterrence on the peninsula, which the Foreign Minister outlined with trash balloons and increased tensions. There's a serious deterrent mission there, right? Number one. Number two, you also heard the Foreign Minister talk about a more global outlook, right? Both in the Indo-Pacific and around the world. In light of these geopolitical developments that we're talking about, how does the military, the two militaries, how are they thinking about these challenges in terms of doctrine, capabilities, procurement strategies, posture? General, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ambassador. What struck me from Minister Park Jin's comments, he talked about creating opportunities. And so when we talk about security in Northeast Asia, Ambassador, you sort of talked about there are global implications. Dr. Kendall-Taylor also sort of stirred some thoughts for me. But I'm reminded that when I think about the ROK-U.S. alliance and here this strategic forum that's sponsored here today by CSIS, I do want to remind everybody that while the U.S. forces in Korea has a minimum of 28,500 people there, there's about 7,400 additional Americans that were missing in action during the war that'll never come home. And too often we forget that. They're there, they may never be found, they may never be recovered. So our alliance is a blood alliance. It's thicker than, and more important, just an agreement written on paper. American blood is intermixed with Korean soil and will remain that way, unfortunately, probably forever. So as I think about opportunities, we see an increasingly capable Korean military, of all services. Our relationship that we've had for 7 decades with the U.S. military, as well as with the other United Nations command sending states, have assisted the Koreans in creating really a very capable first-class military force. And because of that, they've been able to participate globally now in areas in the Middle East, and other missions in Africa, and they've done a superb job. But going back to creating opportunities, I'm optimistic that while we see the North Koreans contributing forces and technology to the conflict in Ukraine, that's not a good thing, but it's going to open the door to us better understanding. And unfortunately, I believe that North Koreans will pay the price in blood. They don't have any military experience, combat experience recently, or very limited. And I think we will learn capabilities. We'll better understand their capabilities. We'll better understand some of their ballistic missile technologies. And as those servicemen kind of come and go from their home country to the combat zone, that's going to open the door for other things for improved understanding. So I think when we think about it in terms of opportunities, an improved understanding of the North Korean nuclear network helps us defend not just the Korean Peninsula, but also our U.S. homeland. It strengthens our resolve not just as the ROK-U.S. alliance, but also global alliances that see what is happening between China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran is destabilizing and not good for the world order. I think, and lastly, when we talk about readiness, just those things that we need to do day in and day out to maintain our capabilities as militaries, is underscores the importance of it, that we've got to have the opportunities. Burgeoning multinational and trilateral military exercises that we're seeing in Northeast Asia and throughout the Indo-Pacific underscore the importance of strong alliances that allow us to maximize and understand each other's capabilities as we deter and defend. Thank you.
All right, outstanding. General, let me come back to you with one follow-up that dovetails with your intervention, which was outstanding. Put yourself back in your old seat on the peninsula, Lieutenant General, 8th Army, CFC, all of the commands and tools at your disposal. If you're seeing this tech transfer that has been described in the opening intervention, submarine technology, other possible habits of cooperation forming, what does that do to your military advice that you're giving both to the 4-star, but also to some of the security leadership, national security leadership on the peninsula and in Washington?
Thank you, Ambassador. I think our joint force, our combined force, is already embracing the idea of multi-domain operations. And that's traditionally we think of land, sea, and air, sea also including undersea. But cyber and space are increasingly important. And if you look at the joint communique from last month out of the SCM, many of these ideas and capabilities and necessities are addressed. And these are things that have developed in our alliance relationship over the last few years. Now, I think we have to be careful about jumping on conclusions from current operations that are occurring with Ukraine and Russia. There are principles of war that are principles, they're guidelines. They've been developed over time. They're timeless in their application. And because we see new capabilities emerging, drones, increased cyber activities in the gray zone, these are all things we have to consider, but not necessarily overreact, but understand and determine how do we apply these timeless principles to better understand and build our alliance capabilities.
All right, outstanding. All right, let's, Dr. Lee, you've waited patiently here. We are long overdue for your intervention, but it'll be worth the wait, I'm sure. First of all, I would just invite you to comment on any of the interventions, but lots of threads to unpack here that dovetail with your expertise. You have the foreign minister talking about the opportunities that are presented for enhanced trilateral cooperation. Foreign minister also touched on an Indo-Pacific strategy. Or the opening comments. I think it was the current foreign minister, Cho Tae-yul, talked about the Indo-Pacific strategy or a Korean version of it that didn't exist a few years back. That also is an area of your expertise. How might these and other policy outlooks of the government in Seoul apply and or be adapted to this new cooperation among these 4 countries and other sub-regional groupings? The floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Ambassador. Let me start with Minister Park Jin's comment on the other panels. So first of all, Indo-Pacific strategy of Republic of Korea has been released after the United States. interestingly, our Indo-Pacific strategy starts with a phrase, ROK is an Indo-Pacific nation. And while the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy starts with the phrase, U.S. is an Indo-Pacific power. So what I mean by that is our Indo-Pacific strategy resembles a lot of the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy, contents and the material of the strategic documents. But our trilateral cooperation among U.S., Japan, and Korea, its root is in Japanese Indo-Pacific strategy, Korea, and U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy. Especially for the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy, among the 10 action plans, the 7th article of the action plan is expand U.S. ROK Japan trilateral cooperation. And U.S. will coordinate Indo-Pacific strategy on the trilateral basis. That's what it says on the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy. And also ours has some contents about trilateral and also as well as Japan's. So I guess the trilateral cooperation, the primary purpose and goal of this trilateral cooperation is on DPRK. So we collaborate our DPRK policies as well as denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. But of course, we have the role to play in the Indo-Pacific region as well. So we do have a responsibility and roles that will be played in the Indo-Pacific region, including the missions and collaboration with the Pacific Islands and also ASEAN nations, as well as Ambassador Lippert says, yes, those are cooperation on the northern front. So trilateral in Peru, Lima, 3 leaders got together and they announced the establishment of the Secretariat soon. And I'm sure that's on the way now. And with the Secretariat and what we are going forward with those agendas, I think we'll find a way to collaborate on the agenda of deterring the northern quadrilateral or triangular cooperation. And going back to General's comment on the multi-domain operation, I always had that question about multi-domain, because according to the Army, multi-domain operation means land, sea, air. But for the trilateral cooperation and trilateral exercise that took place in June 2024, Freedom Edge, they call it a multi-domain exercise, while not including the land. What I mean by that is they have air, sea, and the cyber. But it is really hard to find the place to have this ground force exercise. So that's one of the comments that I had and question that I have for the General as well. So later on, if you have a chance, please get back to me.
I've already lost control.
Because I asked the same question to General Paparo when he visited our institution, KIDA, but I didn't get the proper answer from him. So hopefully you get the answer from you. And I want to pick up on where Dr. Kendall-Taylor left off. I want to mention my analysis on the strategic calculus of KJU on this Russian collaboration. Of course, the first is getting resources. ISR satellite, ICBM re-entry, submarine technology, nuclear power, these are about getting resources. And of course, there's a financial benefit as well. I understand each soldier is getting $2,000 monthly, and there is a $4,600 upfront price. And imagine how much those North Korean workers are getting from the Far East. It's about $500 per month. Compared to that, that's a lot. So there's a financial benefit. And also, they're gaining this combat experience. I agree with General on this front, but they do get this first-hand combat experience of modern warfare. I think that's very important gain for North Korea. And also, they're prepping for Korean Peninsula contingency. What I mean by that is DPRK may expect Russia to engage in the Korean Peninsula under the contingency. That's another gain, I think, in KJU's strategic calculus. And last but not least, increasing leverage over China. By building, strengthening ties with Russia, that would increase the leverage over China. And that's another gain of KJU's on deploying soldiers to Russian front. And of course, how DPRK is helping, supporting Russia. There are two fronts, one soldiers, another weapon. I think soldiers, they're planning to deploy 12,000 until the end of the year. Imagine there are 1.3 million active duty soldiers. I'm not sure if that's the proper ratio or number of soldiers concerning the whole population of this active duty soldiers, which is 1.3 million. And also weapons, they've already provided with 8 million rounds of 120 millimeter and 152 millimeter munitions, but they are expected to provide 170 self-propelled howitzer and also 240 multiple rocket launcher system. So these are about in the range of 60 kilometers, and these are to protect those soldiers, Ukrainian soldiers who are fighting in this Kursk region. And of course, President Biden announced that he will allow North Korean, the Ukrainian soldiers to use the AT-CAMS. This is the U.S. supplied long-range missile. And of course, for the use of this is to protect those Ukrainian soldiers in the Kursk region. So it's going to be AT-CAMS versus North Korean provided artillery and missiles. So that's what's going on right now in the Ukraine and Russian front. I have a couple more ideas and comments to make on how China and U.S. perceives such a situation right now, and what can ROK do on this front.
All right, outstanding, Dr. Lee. Really painted a very cogent and insightful picture on DPRK-Russia cooperation, a couple of new nuggets I had not heard of before, so thank you for that intervention. I'm going to come back to the Foreign Minister, then I'm going to go back to Dr. Kendall-Taylor. Foreign Minister, let me come to you on a piece that dovetails both with technology, I would say new frontiers in the alliance, and I would guess the industrial base of our two countries, Navy shipbuilding, right? You're a former Navy officer, among other things. This is a new piece that I think is important to get in here quickly. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. Sorry about the Navy, General. To jump on the discussion on Indo-Pacific strategy, the three principles the Korean government put into the announcement of our strategy, which is inclusiveness. We will not exclude any specific country in our Indo-Pacific strategy, and trust, which is very important in international relations, especially for rules-based international order, and reciprocity. So based on these three principles, Korea has made it clear that freedom of navigation and flight is in South China Sea. It's very important. Also, peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait is very important for the security and prosperity of the Indo-Pacific region. So I think there are areas where Korea and the United States would continue to work together to make sure that we live in the real Pacific Ocean, a Pacific which means peaceful. To make it really peaceful, I think we should work. And therefore, when I met with the American parliamentary delegation in April last year, when I was in my office, I had a chance to discuss Indo-Pacific strategy with the American congressmen and women. And one of them was Michael Waltz, who was appointed to the National Security Advisor's important position under the second Trump administration. We discussed the philosophy, vision, and the common efforts to be made between Korea and the United States. I gave him the Indo-Pacific strategy pamphlet, which he just took it himself. And then he said, okay, I'll just go through this one very carefully and see how we can cooperate together. Now, the important development is that in the recent telephone conversation between President-elect Trump and President Yoon, they discussed the shipbuilding industry. To my joy and surprise, we all know that American shipbuilding industry has declined during the recent decades, and I think it became one of the election issues in the U.S. campaign. Korea has a world-class shipbuilding industry. We make the largest ships in the world. We make ice-breaking vessels. We have the infrastructure and the skillful workforce in Korea, which will be a great support to revitalize American shipbuilding industry. I looked through the Congressional Research Service report on the current status of American shipbuilding and maritime transportation. It says U.S. has a few ships short of 300, but the Navy admirals want 381 ships, which is about 85 more ships to be made. And Korea would be a perfect partner to cooperate with the United States to move in that direction. So I'm very encouraged that in the first conversation between Korean president and the president-elect in the United States mentioned shipbuilding. So I think we should move in that direction with great vigor and strategy.
Very interesting stuff, Foreign Minister. And I would also just add, as an aside, remember the CNO, Admiral Franchetti, as a one-star was at CNFK, right? So long experience, and Vice Admiral Cooper as well, who's now moving up through the Navy ranks, also a one-star at CNFK. So you have top Navy uniform leadership that have seen the shipbuilding prowess of the Koreans firsthand. We won't open the Navy shipbuilding plan here today. I spent years on that in the Pentagon. That's a tortuously difficult subject, but all I can say is that industrial-based cooperation, very interesting element as a possibility for U.S. ROK cooperation. Let me come back to you, Dr. Kendall-Taylor, after a really good intervention from the Foreign Minister on. You outlined some elements you might want to pull on at the beginning of the panel. I would invite you to pull on a few of those because we haven't made them back. We haven't made it back. Number one, but number two, the other piece is that the grouping of four that we are calling the axis of upheaval here today, Iran, North Korea, Russia, China. President Trump has friendly-ish relations, or at least the prospect for friendly-ish relations with some of those countries. Mm-hmm. How might a Trump 2.0 play in that grouping, and might that be an opening for some sort of wedge strategy, or your thoughts on that basket of issues?
Yeah, I think it's a hard question given all of the uncertainty about how he'll approach a number of different issues. I think as a blanket statement, as a principle, I am very skeptical of the wedge driving strategy. I think, that this relationship, as we've talked about, is deep. It's likely to be durable. And the kind of strong incentives, motivations that these four countries bring to their partnership leaves very little ability, I think, for the United States and its allies to peel one from the other. And I think, as we all probably understand, the costs of doing that would be very significant, because what these countries are after is a diminution of U.S. influence in key regions. So in Ukraine and in Europe, in the Indo-Pacific, these countries want a sphere of influence. They want to be able to have their way in those key regions. And so the United States would have to concede, I think, on principles and areas of influence that I think we would find unacceptable to do so. So I think that, and it's not to say that these countries are aligned in every instance. And as the foreign minister was pointing out, China probably feels, for example, very uncomfortable with what's happening around North Korea. But the problem is, and I've looked at this issue really deeply, despite the fact that you can see, yes, in places like Central Asia, for example, Russia and China might butt heads. But the United States' ability to wield leverage over these natural points of friction in the relationship, I think, is very limited. So there are natural tensions, but I still have struggled to find areas where the United States or its allies could really pull at the seams of those relationships in a way that would produce a significant change in the relationship. I think, and then I want to come back to the point the foreign minister made, and this gets back to the Trump question, is I think how he handles the Ukraine situation will be decisive in really shaping the future trajectory, or at least the urgency with which these four countries are pursuing their partnership. I think we all have to recognize that the war in Ukraine is on a very negative trajectory. President Trump has come in talking about a potential peace plan that would have Ukraine concede 20% of its territory, do away with NATO membership for at least 20 years. And although we say we would continue to supply Ukraine with weapons to defend itself, I think we have to remember what Putin's objectives in this war are. He has talked about the demilitarization of Ukraine. And so there's real questions about what President Trump will meet the resistance, because so far from Russia's perspective, they're not talking about anything other than the capitulation of Ukraine. And if that's something that President Trump is willing to sign up for, then I worry very much that that will only embolden, accelerate the cooperation. I don't think that kind of strategy of a more pragmatic or more stabilized relationship between the United States and Russia would take the air out of this axis of upheaval. I actually think that President Putin would very happily pocket those concessions and continue doing just as what he's doing, because as Putin and Xi talk about, they're orchestrating, in their view, the changes, the likes of which we haven't seen in 100 years. They are committed to this course. They view the United States as in an inexorable decline, and they're going to lean in to accelerate that decline. And so if President Trump does end up significantly pressuring Ukraine to make unacceptable concessions, then I think it will only put wind in the sails of this axis of upheaval.
So then begs the question, a quick follow, fast follow, recommendations for what the U.S. ROK alliance might do in this situation?
Well, I would definitely encourage the ROK to continue its strong support for Ukraine, and given the entry of North Korean fighters, perhaps be willing to provide more direct and more sizable support for Ukraine, to continue to work on other allies to continue to do the same. As the foreign minister mentioned, the deepening of the alliance is critically important from Washington's perspective. If we look out and think about this axis of upheaval, it feels insurmountable. It feels daunting, but we have to remember it's not the U.S. versus the axis of upheaval. We have this very strong network of alliances, the ROK of which is one. So this great service that Korea is doing to come to NATO, to give intelligence briefings about what North Korea is doing with Russia, to help Europeans also to forge a common threat picture of what the allies are up against. The more that Korea can share its insight and its information about North Korea's role and participation in this axis, I think it's incredibly helpful. And in part of that strengthening the alliance, I do think the intelligence piece, there is a really important piece, not just what North Korea will be doing in Ukraine, but more broadly, as we were talking about the deepening military relationships, a lot of these things are now happening out of plain sight. And we are going to have to increase our intelligence and awareness to better understand what kind of technology is being transferred. And in that case, the ROK can play an important role. And then the final point I would make is I do think very much that the strength of the axis of upheaval and its success in reshaping rules will depend on what happens in what we've called swing states. So countries like Indonesia, South Africa, Turkey, Saudi Arabia. And so to the extent that South Korea can also be working with the United States and its allies to increase outreach to this group of countries, I think that will also play a really important role in helping to uphold the current norms that we all benefit from.
Okay, outstanding. We've got about 20 minutes left. I want to get to some questions, so I'm going to go Dr. Lee, General Burleson, questions, and then maybe final thoughts is kind of on the agenda here. And if anybody has a two-finger intervention before we get to questions or after, please let us know. But Dr. Lee, you withheld a little bit on, you heard a lot from Dr. Kendall-Taylor on the Russia, North Korea piece, Ukraine piece. You, in your earlier intervention, teased that you had more to say on the China piece. Could you bring that in to the discussion here? And anything else you'd like to add on top of the prior interventions?
Sure. I think China has a very complex concern now. They have this dilemma. They do have this friends, Russia and North Korea. At the same time, they know this is a foreign intervention we're talking about. So I think at the same time, there has been an election in the U.S. I'm sure China wants to talk to President-elect Trump on these issues as well. So I think what I see on China over the Peru-Lima between ROK-China summit and U.S.-China summit call was China is trying to distance themselves from this DPRK-Russia collaboration. So who knows? But at this time, I think China having this very complex concern and dilemma may head towards the U.S. and opening the talk with the U.S. and also with the trilateral cooperation among ROK-U.S. and Japan. I think there will be an opportunity for those trilateral cooperation to really deal with this Northern Front. At the same time, I think U.S. has done enough, and also how it's measuring Russia, Iran, DPRK, China is collaborating on the Northern Front. But I don't think it will be the case in the future because, number one, I don't see any alternative to a rules-based order. Do they have an alternative they can provide instead of following this rules-based order? Probably not. And also, I don't see any motivation by China to go with these two nations, Russia and DPRK, because there's a huge economic gap between those countries and China. And also, like I said before, they are waiting President Trump to come in. But on the U.S. front, I think there's an issue as well. When Trump administration 2.0 starts in next January 20th, we foresee that Trump administration will jumpstart with Russia-Ukraine issue. But who knows what will happen after he comes in, steps into the office. Well, things can go south, right? So in that case, what are the roles and responsibility of the allies like South Korea and Japan? If that's the case in Ukraine and Russian war, if U.S. is not able to control the situation, it will probably switch or change its perspective and probably have the strategic focus back on Indo-Pacific region, back on China. So that's another scenario that we'll have to look into instead of solely focusing on this Russian-Ukraine issues at this point.
All right, outstanding. Thanks for that very, very good laydown and insightful comments on Indo-Pacific issues. Let me come back to General Burleson, then we'll open up for questions. You've just heard a swirl of very interesting and complex dynamics that confront now the uniform militaries in the United States, Korea, and other allies. You've got geopolitical machinations, tectonic plate shifting. You've got new types of warfare, right? What we've discussed, technology transfer, new technologies that are coming online rapidly, AI, other things like that. If you're in one of your many old jobs in a global role, thinking about the global responsibilities, how would you be thinking first principles about meshing all of these competing elements together to try to basically get the best outcome for commanders in the field, the warfighter? I mean, it's a difficult and complicated challenge at best.
That's a pretty heady question. I'll tackle that by just a couple of the things that came up from the panel members. I go back to creating opportunities and how do we account for changes in technology. So 2 weeks ago was Halloween in the United States. And of course, it was the week before our election and all that. But on the 31st of October, North Korea tested another intercontinental ballistic missile, the Hwasong-19. Solid fuel, I think. Big one. Questions about that, but the Hwasong-18 was also pretty significant. What I think is lost on many of us that live in North America is those two systems likely have the capability to range us here. And so as we look at technology transfer, whether that happened to help build those two systems or what happens in the future, now is the time for us to commit to better understanding that and staying behind denuclearization because it affects our homeland. We're not just talking about Northeast Asia or Asia, but it affects our homeland. And so as we see these burgeoning relationships, they've been around. I mean, these are no surprises. 1950, the Soviet Union and China supported North Korea coming into South Korea. We see a renewal of that. And so the things that we do, we, all of us, military professionals, with our allies and partners to improve our interoperability at multiple echelons. This is not just the soldier in the foxhole, but commands at the operational level, the things that we do at national levels to improve our ability to communicate and understand each other, these consultative groups. Interoperability is not just the human and organizational relationships, it's having standardized procedures. We've had that with the ROK-U.S. Alliance. We now have opportunities with the renewal of sort of the United Nations Command desires, their contributions and assistance, but also technical. There are technical interoperability things which, while we're all sort of sovereign countries, when our militaries need to cooperate, those are opportunities that I think are big ideas on how we improve our interoperability in order to better improve our alliance military capabilities.
Outstanding. And dovetails with Dr. Kendall-Taylor's comments on intelligence sharing as well, right? You got sort of both ends of the spectrum. All right, one final intervention here from the Foreign Minister before we get to questions.
Okay. Let me briefly mention Korea's growing global diplomatic role. As I mentioned, based on this global pivotal state, which we call it GPS initiative, Korea has been actively interacting with major countries in the world, in the G20 forum and also G7 countries. In terms of economic capability as the 10th largest economy in the world, in terms of technological advantage, including AI, batteries, semiconductors, automobiles, and shipbuilding, and digital technology, Korea can actively contribute to the strengthening of democracy and enhancing the economic competitiveness and intensifying the common defense together with these countries. Now, you mentioned, Dr. Kendall-Taylor mentioned BRICS briefly. Now, BRICS is a forum of more than 10 countries, including Russia, China, Brazil, India, but also country like Iran is in the BRICS. So I think that the global balance of power between G7 and BRICS has shifted in favor of BRICS, I think, in terms of number, in terms of economic power, in terms of diverse representation among different countries. But I think that BRICS has its own problem because the membership has been expanded, but the coordination of interest has become more difficult. And also there is no mechanism to implement the decision and the recommendations of the BRICS countries. So I think this is the time that country like Korea should hopefully work closely with the G7 countries and hopefully join the G7 and contribute to the global peace, freedom, and prosperity. I know in session 3 I have to speak again on this issue, but as a kind of teaser on our discussion, I would like to ask your view on what do you think about Korea's joining the G7, perhaps with the countries like Australia, which is a comparable economy, having democracy, free markets, and contributing to the Indo-Pacific strategy through the membership of the Quad, AUKUS, Five Eyes, and 2+2 foreign and defense ministers meeting with Korea. So I will stop at that.
Outstanding. And I think Victor has mentioned Spain as well as a possible entrant there. So you get anyway. So it's a really good way to open it up to questions and a direct solicitation from the foreign minister on that view from the audience, number one. But number two, questions, please. Anyone with questions? We have mics set up. Please keep your question brief, to the point, and I'll farm it out to one of our esteemed panelists here. If you want to go, there's mics over there if you want to stand up. Yeah, there you go. It's not Phil Donahue style. I'm dating myself, you know.
Well, I might need Phil Donahue after this. Thank you so much. I'm Mr. Wendel from the Swedish Embassy. First of all, I fully agree with what has been said about this convergence being very deep and very broad. But I still struggle to understand as to why DPRK has committed so quickly and so extensively to this cooperation, and I would like to hear your thoughts about that. And secondly, perhaps a more hypothetical question. The General mentioned the latest missile tests by DPRK. It might be that they are now so emboldened that they may carry out a 7th atomic bomb test. What would that mean? Thank you.
Foreign Minister, you want to take that? Dr. Lee, you want to take those? Yeah, I was going to say some combination here.
Where's the last part with the 7th nuclear?
Would, if they do, because they've done missile tests, ICBM tests, are they leading up to a 7th nuclear test? And does that test, what are the implications of said nuclear test?
I'm sure General can take over after my comment, right? So I guess a 7th nuclear test, that's been on news for last couple of years, and we haven't had that yet. But we do believe that this time of the year, where DPRK sent in troops to Russian front, and we believe that what happened to the peninsula, because when we think over this Taiwan Strait issue and how this strategic picture of Korean peninsula regarding USFK, if they're not in the peninsula, we say that there is a power or a strategic vacuum in the Korean peninsula. Now DPRK soldiers are in the Russian front, and of course we can say there is a strategic vacuum in the Korean peninsula as well. But we also fear that this might be the time that DPRK may start this fire again on 7th nuclear test. And we do believe that there will be a significant meaning and symbolic meaning into that. Of course, the magnitude of this size and also explosiveness yield will be a lot, multiple times of the 6th nuclear test. And it will be very significant and symbolic in a sense that they're in the process of trying to get this acknowledgement of nuclear as a nuclear state. And I think 7th nuclear test is aiming both goals from the DPRK front.
Okay, and then the question about, first, excellent answer. Sid Seiler will be up at 11:40. He can answer that question too, so we'll put him on the spot. And then the part of the question about what's in it for the North Korean-Russian relationship, why would they undertake these deployments?
I'd maybe just add a small point on the nuclear piece,
please.
but it just to introduce like another concern into the discussion. So it's not the nuclear question on the peninsula, but now the nuclear question vis-a-vis Iran. And I think one of the things, at least I'm a Russia watcher, so from the Russia watching perspective, I think there are a lot of concerns about what's happening in the Middle East. And as the Iranians' conventional military is being so significantly degraded, and as are the capabilities of its proxies all across the region, that Tehran may increase its interest in acquiring a nuclear weapon. And as a Russia watcher, I worry very much then what Russia could do to support and facilitate that process. And the real concern now is that now that Moscow has really shed its concern over being a responsible kind of global actor, it is less constrained now in its actions than it has been in the past, and therefore I think even more likely to be willing to aid the Iranian regime. So just throw that in. But I think on the North Korea-Russia relationship, I think you laid it out really wonderfully, all of the things that the North Koreans are getting out of it. They're getting food, they're getting money, they're getting the salaries for the fighters who are fighting there, but also the workers in the Far East who are supporting it. And really critically, they're getting that battlefield experience. I mean, that's what Russia is giving away to its partners. This is also true of the Russia-China relationship. As they've increased the scope and frequency of their military exercises, Russia is able to convey its lessons learned from Syria, from Ukraine, with all of the drone warfare. So that's happening now through the Russia-China relationship, but it will happen on the battlefields inside Russia, where they will help the North Korean regime overcome one of the key weaknesses, I think, there. And I do think that from the North Korean perspective, there will be the hope that now that they have shed blood for Russia, that if something happens on the Korean Peninsula, now that they've signed their mutual security defense pact, I forget exactly what it is, but that then Russia would be willing to come to North Korea's aid in the case that there's a contingency on the peninsula. So to me, in many ways, this is also a down payment from Kim Jong-un, hoping that there will be reciprocity should he need it in the future. And again, the risk acceptance, as Kim Jong-un understands that he has the backing of both the Russian regime and the Chinese regime, we have seen his provocations only grow. The risk calculus is being turned up on the peninsula, and so I worry very much that that's a check that Mr. Putin might be forced to cash.
And during the coffee break, you're going to have to corner junior National Assembly member, former senior diplomat Wee Sung-lak, who served as Korea's ambassador to Russia, for his insights as well. He's right there in the middle, so putting him on the spot. Foreign Minister, your comments on the 7th nuclear test.
Very briefly on 7th nuclear test, I think it's irrational, irresponsible, and even immoral for North Korea to shoot these missiles or explode these nuclear bombs at a time when people are starving, economy is failing, by squandering these scarce resources for the weapons of mass destruction. So we have to stop North Korea from doing it. The best way is to prevent it from happening through our strengthened deterrence between Korea and the United States. We have this strengthening of the effectiveness of the extended deterrence between Korea and the United States. And we are running nuclear consultative group to prepare and to have the mechanism in advance how to respond to the crisis, nuclear crisis on the Korean Peninsula. Now, we are very concerned. I think this is a serious security threat because North Korea has put the nuclear state in their constitution and announced the offensive nuclear strategy that they can use this weapon if needed. This is a direct threat, existential threat to the Republic of Korea. So, if the 7th nuclear test is conducted, it means that they will have a miniaturized nuclear warhead on their missiles, which they can target, attack South Korea, Japan, the United States. I think we cannot just watch and see, oh, this is another nuclear test by North Korea. Absolutely different test in the 7th nuclear test. And I'm sure that the Korean domestic public opinions to prefer potential for independent Korea's nuclear capability will certainly grow. And I think that North Korea should expect to deal with that possibility if they venture into the seventh nuclear test. I think they should not do it, and we should deter and prevent them from doing it.
All right, on that strong note, I think we are going to have to gavel down. We are at time here. Let me just say a couple of things in summary here. We outlined really the daunting but not insurmountable challenges that the geopolitical order is now posing to the U.S. ROK alliance. We've talked a lot about the premium on deepening, strengthening the alliance as a table stakes type of action between our two countries. We've also talked, the foreign minister really brought it out well, the opportunities on the international stage in terms of foreign policy, trilateral cooperation, regional groupings like the G7. We'll get into both of those later on today. Interoperability, a real opportunity there. Intelligence sharing, right, and technology, right? Shipbuilding, semiconductors, electric vehicle batteries, display technologies, you name it, it's there, right? So well positioned across a range of issues, no shortage of challenges, but that's why we always say in the U.S. ROK Alliance, kachi kapshida. So with that, we'll gavel down and thank the panel, please. Thank you.